It happened in the blink of an eye, an ID tossed to the floor like trash, and with it the dignity of a woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire. The grand lobby of Ashton Financial in downtown Atlanta shimmered with polished marble and piped-in classical music. But that calm, curated elegance shattered the moment Monica Harris, a black woman, in a simple navy blazer and scuffed heels, stood before the teller window. She wasn't just another customer. She was the CEO of a $2.3 billion construction firm. Yet none of that mattered when Emily, a young white teller in crisp white silk, took one look at Monica's ID and tossed it onto the stone floor with barely a glance. No apology, no explanation. Just the cold sound of plastic hitting tile and a silence that screamed louder than any insult. Monica's back straightened, her breath tight in her chest. Around her eyes watched, but no one intervened. She knelt to retrieve her ID, her every movement a quiet act of resistance. When she rose, she faced Emily with grace and quiet fire. But the damage had been done. It wasn't just about a dropped ID, it was about the unseen judgments, the silent dismissals, the way a woman who didn't look like the bank's usual clientele was treated as though she didn't belong. She did belong. And she would prove it not with shouting or threats, but by showing the entire institution exactly who they had just humiliated. The weight of the moment still lingered as Monica took a quiet step back from the counter ID in hand, pulse steady, but heart racing. Every second ticked by like a drumbeat in a silent battlefield. The space around her, the sterile opulence of the bank lobby, the scent of expensive wood polish, the hush of whispers behind manicured hands returned to its eerie normalcy, as though nothing had happened. But inside Monica Harris, something had begun to shift. This wasn't just a personal slight. It was a quiet, insidious war on her very existence, one she had fought all her life without armor. She turned and walked toward the reception desk, where she hoped for a shred of professionalism, maybe even a sliver of decency. Instead, she found Tiffany, a red-haired receptionist with gold-rimmed glasses and a pastel pink manicure, who didn't even look up when Monica approached. Monica stood in front of the desk, composed but alert, waiting. 1 minute passed, then 2. The message was clear. "You are not welcome here. You don't matter." "Excuse me," Monica said politely, her voice smooth and restrained. "Could you please tell me?" Before she could finish, Tiffany lifted one perfectly manicured hand in a silent gesture that said more than words ever could be quiet. "You're in the way." Monica's lips parted slightly, stunned by the blatant dismissal. But before she could process the insult, the bank's front doors opened with a cheerful jingle, and in walked a white couple clad in designer suits and smiling ease. Immediately, Tiffany transformed. Her frosty expression melted into one of glowing hospitality. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. Right on time, she beamed, practically leaping to her feet. "Let me get you your VIP passes. We've prepared the lounge with fresh tea." Monica watched the scene unfold with rising tension in her chest. Her presence had triggered silence, suspicion, and disdain. The Fishers' arrival brought tea smiles and open doors. She glanced down at her modest leather shoes, then back at Tiffany, who was now greeting the next guest with syrupy sweetness. Monica remained still, a statue of resilience, in a room built on exclusion. She could feel the eyes of other employees flick toward her, then quickly shift away. It wasn't just neglect, it was calculated silence. Emily's cold rejection, Tiffany's open contempt, and now the quiet avoidance by others all formed a pattern. This was no accident. It was culture. It was complicity. But Monica didn't leave. She didn't shrink. She stood there rooted not in rage, but in purpose. In that moment, she reminded herself of what was at stake, not just for her, but for every woman of color who had ever walked into a polished room and been treated as if she didn't belong. She was not going to let this pass. Not this time. This wasn't just a mishandled transaction. It was a battle for dignity, and Monica Harris was prepared to fight it with the most disarming weapon she had: unshakable composure. Because she knew that behind all the marble glass and fake smiles, this bank was about to learn who they had just tried to silence. Monica Harris stood tall in the center of the Ashton financial lobby, no longer just a humiliated customer, but a woman reclaiming her voice. She had spent the night reviewing every document tied to the bank's $2.3 billion partnership with her company Harris Development Group. Each line of ink, every signature, reminded her exactly who she was, not just in title, but in substance. By the time morning light streaked across the city skyline, Monica was no longer angry. She was focused. She dressed with purpose that day. Sharp black suit heels polished to a mirror sheen, her hair swept into a sleek chignon. Every inch of her appearance radiated authority. No apologies. No fear. Only truth, wrapped in executive precision. When she re-entered the bank, the change in atmosphere was immediate. The same tellers and assistants who had dismissed her the day before now glanced up in startled recognition. There was something different about her today. And it wasn't just her clothes, it was the way she walked, as if the very floor beneath her belonged to her. She went straight to the reception desk, where Tiffany sat once again typing idly, her frosted nails tapping the keyboard. Monica didn't wait this time. "I'd like to speak with branch manager Richard Kent immediately," she said in a tone that left no room for negotiation. Tiffany's eyes flicked up, unprepared for the commanding presence in front of her. "Mr. Kent is very busy," she replied coolly. Monica placed her business card on the counter with deliberate grace. "Then I suggest you let him know Monica Harris, CEO of Harris Development Group, is here regarding the $2.3 billion contract your bank has signed with us." Tiffany blinked. Her composure cracked as her eyes dropped to the card. The color drained from her face. Without another word, she scrambled from her seat and disappeared into the back offices. Moments later, Richard Kent emerged, his face a mix of confusion and dawning panic. "Ms. Harris, I wasn't expecting you," he stammered. Monica didn't smile. She extended a firm hand and met his gaze. "I'm sure you weren't." Kent ushered her into his office like a man realizing he'd just stepped onto a minefield. Inside, Monica spread out her stack of contracts and supporting documents on his desk. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her voice was low, calm, and devastating. "What happened yesterday was not just unacceptable, it was institutional," she said. "Your staff didn't just mishandle a customer. They humiliated a strategic partner. The magnitude of that error cannot be overstated." As Kent flipped through the paperwork and began recognizing the scope of her company's involvement with the bank, his face grew paler. He tried to offer a weak apology, but Monica cut him off. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to ensure you understand the gravity of this moment. This is your bank's final opportunity to make it right, and I trust you're wise enough to know what comes next." With that, she gathered her documents, turned toward the door, and walked out, leaving the weight of her words behind, like a quiet storm no one in that office would forget. For the first time since the incident began, the balance of power had shifted, and Monica Harris now held every card. The following afternoon, Monica Harris took the fight one level higher. She wasn't interested in redemption from a local branch manager who had already failed to lead. This was no longer about Richard Kent, or even the individual employees who had disrespected Harris. It was about the entire culture of Ashton Financial. And so she requested an immediate meeting with Daniel Whitmore, the bank's regional vice president. This wasn't a mere courtesy call. Monica made it clear that the matter was directly tied to the institution's $2.3 billion partnership with her firm. The urgency of her tone didn't go unnoticed. Within 30 minutes, a meeting was arranged at the bank's corporate headquarters, a glass and steel skyscraper perched high above the city, a place built to exude dominance. Monica arrived with the same composure she'd carried into every boardroom she'd conquered over the last decade, her black leather briefcase in hand filled with cold facts and hard truths. Whitmore's office was a penthouse of polished sophistication, floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract art, and a conference table large enough to host a Fortune 500 war room. Monica stepped inside, calm and poised, dressed in another sleek suit that demanded respect before she even spoke a word. "Good afternoon, Ms. Harris," Whitmore greeted her, rising from his seat with a neutral smile. He offered her a chair across from him, but Monica didn't waste time on pleasantries. She opened her briefcase and slid the thick dossier across the table. "I suggest you take a good look at this contract, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice firm but measured. "Harris Development Group is not a passive client. We are your strategic partner on a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure initiative. Yesterday, your team treated me like I didn't belong in the lobby, despite the fact that I co-signed this agreement alongside you." Whitmore flipped open the folder, his brow furrowing as he began to scan the signatures. His own name stared back at him clear as day underneath Monica's. The color drained slightly from his face. Is this real?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own oversight. Monica's reply was swift and unwavering. "It's very real. What's also real is that your bank created an environment where a black woman CEO who brought you a $2 billion deal was treated like a trespasser. I didn't come here for an apology. I came to offer you a chance to fix it before your institution pays the price in lost contracts and public trust." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and humbling. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, shaken not only by the magnitude of the deal, but by the realization that his institution had grossly underestimated the woman now sitting across from him. "Ms. Harris," he finally said, quieter. "Now I had no idea this happened." "I assure you." But Monica raised a hand. "The issue isn't just what you knew, it's what you allowed. Ignorance isn't a defense. Culture starts at the top." Her words weren't loud, but they cut with precision. And in that moment, Daniel Whitmore realized that Monica Harris was not just a powerful client. She was the catalyst for a reckoning his bank could no longer outrun. Monica Harris' words echoed long after she exited the sleek corporate boardroom, leaving behind a stunned Daniel Whitmore grasping the weight of his institution's failure. Within the hour, the reverberations of her confrontation had reached every corner of Ashton Financial's leadership. By sundown, an emergency directive had been issued. A full-scale internal investigation was to begin immediately. Surveillance footage from the branch was pulled. Call logs reviewed, employee records scrutinized. For the first time in the bank's history, senior executives were no longer asking how to spin a problem, but how to answer for one. The climate inside the bank shifted from controlled prestige to hushed panic. Staff who once brushed off concerns about bias and mistreatment were now sitting in closed-door meetings trying to recall every word, every glance, every microaggression that might come back to haunt them. At the heart of the firestorm was Emily, the young teller, who had so casually tossed Monica's ID onto the cold tile floor. Once proud and confident, Emily now sat in a tense conference room with the bank's compliance officer's face pale as the security footage played on the screen. The moment was irrefutable. She had handled Monica's identification with disdain, flung it without a word, and shown no remorse. When asked to explain herself, her voice trembled, offering feeble excuses about being overwhelmed and uncertain about protocol. But no one was buying it. Rachel, the colleague who had watched the incident unfold with barely disguised amusement, was next. She too fell silent when recordings revealed her crude comments about fake checks and clients who didn't look the part. Her nervous laughter once shrugged off, as harmless banter now stood as undeniable proof of a culture steeped in quiet prejudice. Most damning of all was Richard Kent, the branch manager, who had not only failed to intervene, but had actively contributed to Monica's humiliation. Footage captured his dismissive body language, his sharp tone, and his final comment suggesting Monica would be better served elsewhere. When questioned by bank leadership, Kent offered no meaningful defense. His career, once considered untouchable within the institution, now hung by a thread. The internal committee, led by the Compliance and Ethics Division, pressed him with a question he couldn't answer. As a leader, how could you allow blatant discrimination to unfold in front of you and do nothing? At the reception desk, Tiffany faced her own reckoning. The footage showed her pointedly ignoring Monica, her gesture of dismissal caught on camera with chilling clarity. The bank's HR team had received multiple corroborating accounts from witnesses confirming Tiffany's long history of icy conduct toward clients of color. Overwhelmed by the scrutiny and media whispers already brewing outside the walls, Tiffany submitted her resignation within 48 hours, slipping away quietly before the storm could fully consume her. Ashton Financial's leadership moved swiftly. A zero-tolerance memo was sent out bank-wide, the first of its kind, declaring that even subtle forms of bias would now be grounds for dismissal. Every employee, from the C-suite to the tellers, would undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training. But more than that, a cultural audit was underway. No longer was it enough to say, "This isn't who we are." The bank now had to reckon with the truth. This was who they had been. And thanks to Monica Harris, silence was no longer an option. With public pressure mounting and internal accountability no longer optional, Ashton Financial launched the most aggressive reform campaign in its corporate history. The fallout from Monica Harris' quiet defiance had rippled beyond the marble floors of that downtown branch and straight into the foundation of the institution itself. The bank's leadership, now under intense scrutiny, moved quickly to rebuild its shattered reputation. But Monica's story had exposed something far deeper than a personnel issue. It revealed a culture that had allowed indifference and prejudice to fester in silence for years. Now there was no going back. The first order of business: immediate disciplinary action. Emily the teller, whose actions triggered the chain of events, was dismissed without ceremony. Surveillance footage, audio recordings, and her own inconsistent testimony left no room for leniency. She walked out of the building she once commanded with smug confidence, her shoulders slumped, her name already whispered across industry forums. Rachel, her co-conspirator, was placed on indefinite suspension and required to enroll in intensive diversity and anti-bias training if she hoped to ever return. She sat in a bare conference room, listening as compliance officers replayed her laughter that once felt harmless, now ringing as sharp as an alarm bell. For the first time, Rachel began to understand that discrimination didn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it just smirked and nodded. But the most significant action came against Richard Kent. The branch manager who had failed not just to lead, but to even listen, was stripped of his title after a board review and reassigned to an administrative support role far removed from decision-making authority. His new office was a stark contrast to the polished corner suite he once occupied. No windows, no assistants. Just a desk, a phone, and the echo of opportunity lost. Though the demotion was decisive, it wasn't vindictive. It was a reminder silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is complicity. The reforms didn't stop with punishments. Ashton Financial rolled out a sweeping corporate initiative that touched every tier of the organization. Diversity and anti-discrimination training became mandatory, not a checkbox, but an immersive program led by external experts who didn't sugarcoat the truth. From regional directors to entry-level hires, every employee sat through hours of seminars on unconscious bias, cultural humility, and inclusive communication. Breakout groups discussed real scenarios, uncomfortable truths, and how small slights could snowball into institutional harm. And this time, no one was allowed to look away. Simultaneously, a new oversight division was formed, reporting directly to senior leadership. Its sole responsibility was monitoring customer fairness, flagging suspicious conduct, and ensuring that every person who walked through their doors, regardless of skin color, attire, or background, was treated with dignity. At the helm of this task force was Ariana Schultz, a former civil rights lawyer with a reputation for turning compliance language into action. Her presence alone signaled the bank's new tone performative statements would no longer suffice. All of this was just the beginning. The leadership at Ashton Financial knew they couldn't erase what had happened to Monica Harris, but they could ensure it never happened again. Not to her, not to anyone. The reckoning had arrived not with protest signs or news cameras, but with the unwavering strength of a woman who refused to stay silent. And now the institution that once looked down on her was fighting to rise to her standard. As Ashton Financial raced to rebuild its fractured culture, the employees at the heart of the scandal found themselves embarking on personal reckonings of their own journeys, neither swift nor comfortable, but necessary. Emily, once the picture of smug confidence at the teller window, had spent her days since termination in quiet anonymity. The news of her dismissal had circulated quickly across financial networks, making re-employment a steep uphill climb. For a time, she disappeared from the spotlight entirely. But guilt has a way of following close behind. One morning she spotted a flyer posted on a grocery store bulletin board, Equal Access Foundation. Volunteers needed to assist underserved communities with financial literacy. On a whim, and perhaps out of desperation. Emily attended the orientation. What began as a half-hearted attempt to appear reformed slowly evolved into something real. Sitting beside elderly residents, immigrant workers, and young Black students anxious about opening their first checking accounts, Emily finally really saw the damage that people like her had caused. Over the months, she became a fixture at the foundation, offering assistance, not from a pedestal, but from a place of humility. And as she listened to stories not unlike Monica's, the shame she once tried to outrun became the very reason she stayed. Meanwhile, Rachel, who had smirked along with the jokes and whispered to colleagues in complicity, took a different path. She didn't just enroll in the required anti-bias training. She immersed herself in it. In one powerful session, a Black woman in her 40s, herself a former banker turned educator, posed a challenge that pierced Rachel's self-defenses. When was the last time you questioned your silence? That night, Rachel went home, opened her laptop, and began drafting an open letter. In it, she detailed her role in Monica Harris' humiliation and how for years she had laughed at the wrong things and looked away at the wrong times. The letter went viral, not because of eloquence, but because of raw honesty. For once, she didn't try to rewrite her past, she faced it. Afterward, she enrolled in a corporate ethics program and began mentoring new hires on recognizing their own blind spots. Her penance wasn't complete, but it had begun. And then there was Richard Kent. Stripped of his title and buried in a windowless back office, Richard initially seethed at what he viewed as a fall from grace. But with no staff to manage, no authority to wield, and only reports to file, the silence grew deafening. He began reading the very complaint files he used to toss aside. Case after case of customers, most of them people of color, flagging issues of mistreatment or dismissal. The patterns were unmistakable. Shame gave way to introspection. Seeking purpose beyond paperwork, he joined the Community Business Initiative, a nonprofit that helped minority-owned startups gain access to capital. There, Richard faced a younger version of himself, eager entrepreneurs who had doors slammed in their faces without reason. One afternoon, as he listened to a determined black business owner recount the 5 times his loan applications were rejected, Richard saw Monica's eyes staring back at him, and in that moment he understood the depth of harm his silence had allowed. Their journeys were neither dramatic nor televised. There were no headlines, no applause, but they were real. And perhaps that was enough. Because while Monica Harris never demanded repentance, the weight of her dignity had forced 3 people, and eventually an entire institution, to stop, reflect, and begin again. While those who had wronged her began their quiet paths toward redemption. Monica Harris turned her focus not to revenge, but to purpose. She had no interest in parading her story across media channels or turning her pain into a spectacle. Instead, she poured her energy into something far more meaningful. In the weeks following the incident, as Ashton Financial scrambled to contain the fallout and the public's attention slowly shifted elsewhere, Monica quietly launched Empower, Forward, an intensive leadership and business training program designed specifically for young entrepreneurs and women of color. To the outside world, it may have seemed like a natural move for a successful CEO, but for Monica, it was deeply personal. She knew firsthand what it meant to walk into a room and be underestimated, dismissed, or seen as less than simply because of her skin tone or modest appearance. Empower Forward wasn't just about education. It was about instilling the kind of unshakable confidence that allowed a woman to pick her ID off the floor and still stand taller than anyone in the room. The program began humbly, just a few folding chairs in a borrowed community center space in South Atlanta, a PowerPoint presentation. Monica designed herself, and a whiteboard scribbled with the words, "Know your worth. Lead with it." But word spread quickly. Each session brought more attendees, aspiring business owners who had been turned away from banks, single mothers trying to scale side hustles into real enterprises, and college students who were the first in their families to even imagine starting a company. Monica taught each class personally in those early weeks, often staying after hours to offer one-on-one guidance. She didn't just teach strategy, she shared her story. Not the boardroom victories or Forbes accolades, but the moments of raw rejection, the times she had to swallow pride to keep moving. And yes, the day her ID was thrown to the floor by someone who thought she didn't belong. For many, those sessions became more than just educational. They were transformational. One young woman named Kayla, a 23-year-old whose voice often quivered when speaking, approached Monica after class one evening, eyes shimmering. "Ms. Harris," she whispered today, "was the first time I walked into a bank and didn't feel afraid because I finally understood who I am." That single sentence reminded Monica why Empower Forward mattered. It wasn't about teaching balance sheets or market strategy, though those came in time. It was about reclaiming spaces that had once made people like Kayla and like Monica feel small. Within months, the program expanded to underserved neighborhoods across Atlanta, with funding from Monica's personal foundation. She brought in mentors, offered startup grants, and even partnered with financial institutions, excluding Ashton Financial, to provide fair access to capital. Her network of alumni grew rapidly, many of whom returned to serve as mentors themselves. And all the while, Monica remained in the background, never chasing praise, just building a better path forward. She understood something her former oppressors hadn't. Real change doesn't come from shouting down the old, it comes from lifting up the next generation to build something better. And in that mission, Monica Harris was just getting started. Monica Harris never intended to take center stage, but sometimes the truth pulls you into the spotlight, whether you want it or not. Months after the Empower Forward program had gained citywide attention, she received a formal invitation from the Atlanta Business Leadership Council, a prestigious gathering of executives, entrepreneurs, and public officials. The keynote speaker slot had opened unexpectedly. To Monica's surprise, the invitation bore the signature of none other than Daniel Whitmore, the same regional VP who had once sat across from her, stunned and ashamed, as she laid bare his bank's failure. Now he was asking her to speak not as a client, not as a token, but as a leader. Monica hesitated at first. She wasn't in the business of performative healing, nor did she want a stage that would reduce her pain to applause. But then she thought of Kayla, of the dozens of young people who had walked into Empower Forward with nothing but doubt and walked out with purpose. If telling her story could light a fire in just one more of them, it would be worth it. On the evening of the conference, the grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel pulsed with anticipation. Hundreds of Atlanta's most powerful figures sat shoulder to shoulder under the glittering chandeliers. Monica stepped onto the stage in a deep navy suit, her presence calm, her gaze steady. She didn't open with numbers or credentials. She didn't talk about her company's billions or even mention Ashton Financial by name. Instead, she posed a single question, one that dropped like a pin into the velvet hush of the room. How would our world change if we trusted someone the first time they told us who they are? The room stilled. There was no sound except the breathless stillness of people not yet realizing they were about to be changed. In the front row sat Daniel Whitmore, eyes lowered in quiet reflection. Next to him, Richard Kent sat stiffly, a shadow of the man who once ruled his branch with smug confidence. Further down the row sat Emily and Rachel, faces more humble, now both invited by Monica Note for spectacle, but for understanding. And yet Monica didn't name them. She didn't have to. Her message wasn't about vengeance. It was about vision. She spoke about culture, the quiet rot of institutions that smile on the surface while dismissing dignity behind glass doors. She talked about bias, about how it doesn't always shout, but it always harms. She spoke not as a victim, but as a mirror. Her final words weren't a plea or a declaration. They were a charge. If we're brave enough to believe in each other's worth without requiring someone to prove it, perform it, or plead for it, then we are brave enough to change everything. The applause didn't come immediately. It came slowly, respectfully, and then all at once, a thunderous standing ovation that wasn't just for Monica Harris, but for the truth she had delivered. As she stepped off the stage, Daniel Whitmore stood and extended his hand not to claim credit, but in quiet thanks. Monica took it, held his gaze, and with a slight nod reminded him change doesn't begin in boardrooms. It begins in moments like this, moments when dignity is finally seen and, more importantly, believed. As Monica Harris exited the ballroom to a tide of applause, she wasn't thinking of recognition. She was thinking of the next young woman who would walk into a bank, a boardroom, or a classroom and wonder if she belonged. She hoped that by sharing her story, she had cracked open something greater than policy or profit possibility. In the days that followed, letters flooded the offices of Empower Forward, not just from hopeful entrepreneurs, but from those who had once stood on the other side of her story. A handwritten note arrived from Richard Kent, humbly admitting his past failure and thanking Monica for teaching him what leadership really looks like. Another came from Tiffany, who wrote simply, "I now ask myself every day, did I see the whole person that change began with you?" Through it all, Monica stayed grounded in one truth. Real power isn't in how loudly we demand respect, but in how consistently we walk in our worth even when no one offers applause. Let this story be a reminder. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to stand firm in your value. Whether you're overlooked, underestimated, or even humiliated, remember the most lasting change often starts with quiet, steady courage. If Monica's story moved, you would love to hear yours. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to reclaim your dignity? Share it in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you believe in the power of stories that inspire change, hit like, subscribe, and join us for more true tales of resilience, justice, and hope.